Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Giller.
Hello and happy Tuesday. Welcome everyone. I hope you are doing well and I am super excited for today. I am joined by Tom Hoffman. Tom,
Hey,
how are you today?
I am thrilled. A couple of days before a nice long break coming up. Happy to be here with you, man. This is exciting.
Yes, I can't wait for you to share some of your knowledge and wisdom with the Salesforce community here. So for those of you who are brand new to the Brainiac Show, to this live weekly show, just want to explain some of the logistics. So the show is 1 hour long and it's broken up into 3 simple segments. The first one, as you can see over there, is the strategy. So I sometimes refer to it as like a talking head segment. And for this week, Tom is going to walk us through best practices on how to set expectations for any Salesforce project. That's going to last about 20 minutes long, and then we're going to segue into the show me, there it is, the show me segment, where Tom is going to be sharing his screen, and he's going to be sharing some best practices on moving from the concept of using Process Builder to now doing some of the same or similar kind of things in Flow. So we're basically going to be talking about Flow design elements and explaining how you can do Process Builder in Flow to some extent. And then we have our last segment, which is open Q&A. So if you've got any Salesforce related questions on either anything that we talk about today or anything else Salesforce related, hit us up.
It doesn't have to be Salesforce related. Like,
Then people are going to ask like blue or red, what's your favorite color? I mean, it could be crazy stuff.
well,
You know what? Go ahead and try us out. Let's see what we can do. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to segue into the first segment, the strategy segment. All right, Tom, this is all you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think what I really want to talk about expectation setting, when we're thinking about topics and sort of what would be very relevant. I believe expectation setting is sort of foundational to success, both internally and for clients, and in terms of managing, um, a positive relationship and positive experience throughout any project, not just Salesforce projects. I think expectation setting is a discipline that applies everywhere, in a professional, even personal environment. And so, what I wanted to sort of talk about is um, where expectation setting begins, and then also sort of how to keep doing it throughout a project, where it applies, and sort of the underpinnings of why it's important. And so just picking up with the concept of expectation setting, there's this concept out there and it's called VUCA. It's been around for about 30 years. And it's been in a lot of like leadership theories, and the military uses it. And what it really means is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so VUCA is something that we experience sort of all the time as we go through life, or as we go through, any sort of experience. And when you think about the times in your life or the times at work when you feel the highest levels of anxiety, uh, and you have the worst experiences, and you think about the core of them, it's because things are changing quickly and unexpectedly, which is volatility. Um, there is not sort of clear expectations for you and what the outcomes and what you're supposed to be doing, which is uncertainty. There's usually something challenging involved or something you're not familiar with, so that we have complexity. And then ambiguity, you're not really sure who's in charge, who owns what you're working towards, what does success look like, all of that. And so if that's the sort of foundation of failure, then how do we get ahead of that? How do we beat that?
And
And I
by
think
the
the
way, we
answer,
also have just the element of change, where a lot of people, even if everything else is covered, they know what's coming, they know everything that there is about the project, they're excited for it, but they're just afraid of change. And that really rattles people.
right? So I think expectation setting begins before a project starts, right? As you're even just beginning to talk with whoever your audience is, if you're like us in consulting, or if you're an internal admin and you are basically a consultant for the business that you work at, right? Setting those expectations begins before a project starts. And I think that comes down to defining things like, what is success? Who is responsible for different parts of a project? What is our cadence going to be? What happens if that cadence gets disrupted? You know, who's responsible for things like sending out meeting minutes, and what are the expectations for testing and responding for testing, the timeline for that, and what happens if something is introduced that we didn't know about? These are all of the things that as you go through a project, timeline delays, new requirements, and something just takes longer to develop than you initially thought. These are all the things that make projects go off the rails. But if you have rules and guidelines in place ahead of time, it helps. And so one thing that we do, and I think, Dave, you do the same, is the project kickoff. And we do it both internally and then also with our clients. And so our internal kickoffs are very, they're a little bit looser, but we cover the material in a very important way, right? We talk about the SOW. We introduce them to the people that they're going to be interacting with on the client side and the roles that they're going to play. We talk about the timeline. We talk about any sort of political or social things that they need to be aware of. And then we define the roles for the people on the team. We'll say, hey, Brian, you're going to own this part of the engagement. And then, hey, Christina, this section is going to be yours. And Ebony, you're going to have this particular section. And this is how we see it all unfolding in the timeline. And we'll also inform them of any potential risks. Like, hey, the client has a major audit happening in April. And so we can't afford to push on the deadline. We have to make sure that we're staying inside of these things. So we do that internally. And then when we have our client kickoff, we go through one more time our SOW. We go through our change order process. We go through our cadence in terms of our weekly stand-ups, our sprint reviews and sprint demos, our sprint testing and UAT schedules, the timeline. We provide them a place where they should share their documents. We remind them of our project guide and where to access those. And we really define everything in there. It's basically a how to engage with us. And while that sounds very sophisticated, that's born out of a lot of pain and failure. We are sophisticated now because I think as anyone who's been on here, we experienced the pain of not doing that on projects. And over that time, have learned that this is the way. And so hopefully here, to share this with everyone else, that defining those expectations of what a project looks like and what it is like to engage with you either as an admin working as part of a Salesforce team internally, or a consultant, coming in to work with it, what the business looks like, is really critical for success from the beginning of a project.
Absolutely. And by the way, I just wanted to chime in and say, to the point that you brought up earlier, where a lot of times these cadences or this level of formality or the framework that you just described often comes out of the pain of not doing it. That is, not only is that so true, I often encounter people who say, I could just wing it. Like, I don't need to be that formal, or the people I'm working with, they don't want a certain level of formality. My response is, and I really think anyone who is a parent will understand what I'm about to say. It's sort of like, warning the child, don't touch that oven, it's hot. Don't touch the oven, it's hot. Don't touch the oven, it's hot. And at some point, if they keep insisting, they're going to touch the oven. They're going to feel the pain themselves. They're going to learn. They're going to adjust. There's only so much you can do to help prepare them. And on the flip side, I will also say that even for myself, doing this, meaning Salesforce project management for as long as I have, as well as IT project management for way longer, my processes, my standards, my procedures are constantly evolving. I'm constantly adding or tweaking things into that type of framework based on the experiences that I've had in the past.
Yeah, it is. That's so true. I'm thinking about my son. His latest thing at bedtime is how come every night, you tell me what I'm doing wrong, because in his mind I'm telling him what, hey, you need to go to bed, it's time to go to sleep, or like, hey, stop getting out of bed and goofing around and things like that. um, but my expectation for him is very clear, right? That I expect him to go to bed at 8:30, and sort of he pushes back, but he knows he's breaking a rule.
And when he's tired in the morning, you can just factually say, if you would have gone to bed at 8 o'clock, you wouldn't be this tired now.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy with the 6-year old, but
Yes, I agree.
lucky with clients, this isn't, expectation setting isn't about a gotcha. It isn't about being able to point back and say, hey, remember we talked about this. Um, it's really about making sure that we're reducing that volatility, the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and that people are very clear and comfortable about what's about to unfold. Saying, hey, it's okay. Sometimes we learn about a new requirement as a project is happening, or sometimes we're going to show you in a sprint demo or in sprint testing our understanding of your ask and how we wrote our user story and acceptance criteria. And you said that looks great, but then you get it in your hands and you're playing with it and you're like, oh, that's not quite right. What I really meant is this. And that's okay. Change orders are okay. Changing requirements and extending a deadline is okay, because we're not here to deliver you a timeline. We're not here to deliver you a user story. We're here to deliver you a product and a platform that should transform your business and make your employees and customers and clients happier. It should allow them to have a better experience. It should allow your business to be more efficient and more profitable. That's our goal. We're not here because we're serving a calendar. Like, we're not here so we can serve like the letter of an SOW. And so let's keep our goal in mind and let's operate under this golden rule of development. And that is, we're all doing the best we can with the information we had available at that moment. And so expectation setting creates the psychological safety that allows the golden rule to work. And that's sort of the underpinning of all of this is, you think about psychological safety and the concept that's really finally sort of has its time in allowing people to have candor and where candor is appropriate. And with clear expectation setting, difficult conversations aren't hard. And I think this gets back to sort of my pain in adopting this, because anyone will tell you, I am sure, if there's any project managers of mine who've ever had the displeasure of having me as a lead consultant on a project, knows that I am the one that bucks the most against process. I'm the fly by the seat of my pants sort of cowboy. I always say that what we do is more art than science, and so and they're trying to put the box around me. um,
And
but
that's
what
fine because you know what? I think when it comes to managing any project, especially any Salesforce project, maybe with other, not maybe, with other platforms, there's only one way to do things, and that's how you do it. With Salesforce and many other platforms, there are several ways to accomplish a particular goal. So I do agree with you that there is some art to it as well. It's not all science. There is definitely some art to it, and there's some art to even gathering the business requirements, identifying what is the goal, how to interpret the new facts as they've been uncovered in the last 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 days, and respond to it. So there definitely is, I think it needs to be with every project, some balance of the two. And I can tell you that I sort of coming from the other end of the spectrum, when I first started my career as a Salesforce admin as well as consultant, I focused more from the perspective of it's a science. I mean, it's a well-known fact. In order to accomplish A, you must do B, C, D, and E. End of story. There's no negotiation here. And I realized that not only was I incorrect, I also realized that I was ticking off a whole lot of people who it becomes so easy to prove me wrong.
Yeah, no flexibility.
Right. If you're so adamant about it, it becomes so easy to discredit you. So I've learned that there's a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
importance that needs to go to the art as well.
And well, and I think I work best right now in allowing I would to their credit, we have amazing project managers who are patient and allow me the space that I need to do the work that I do, but also because we've created that environment of expectation setting and goal setting, that they have the ability, and I recognize it, they can provide the candor, they have the space to tell me what I need, what they need me to know without it being anything inappropriate or difficult. And I think for a long time, getting back to sort of the root of this tangent, I was scared to upset clients, and I would oftentimes work until 2 in the morning to try and meet deadlines when really a week before, had I done better expectation setting with a client, I wouldn't be where I am. And so recently I saw, and I forgot who it was, and if you see this is not nothing against your poll, but someone on LinkedIn put a poll up that says, hey, you have a deployment, today's deployment day and your product isn't ready. Do you tell the client last minute or do you deploy and fix it in production? And my immediate response to that was, why are you even here? Why have you even gotten to this point? Because you knew this 3 weeks ago. You knew this 2 weeks ago. You knew this 1 week ago that this deadline wasn't going to happen. Very rarely are we coming into the day that something's due and it's like, oops, it's not going to happen. It's like missing a due date on a bill. It's not like you show up on the end of the month on a bill and you're like, oh yeah, no, can't pay this one. You kind of knew coming in that there was something that needed to be addressed there. And so setting the expectation is true inside of a project and saying, hey, client or department head or business owner of this process, I know we wanted this, we were aiming for next week as a deadline. That's not looking realistic. We ran into some other challenges. We've been working really hard on it. It's important to us. We know it's important to you. So we want to make sure that you're aware this is actually looking more like next week or the week after, or we're going to need 3 or 4 more days, or we'll provide you an update a few days from now on what we think the realistic timeline is. I was so scared of that conversation that I would stay up all night and I would kill myself and I would just be exhausted and so fearful. And then what I realized is that when I just said that to begin with, almost every time a client goes, no, it's okay. We understand. This stuff is hard. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what have I been doing for so many years? Why have I been torturing myself? Like, this is so easy. People are actual humans and they value the work that we do. And if we're honest and open and set expectations appropriately, they respond typically in kind. Now, sometimes you have people who are maybe not as human as the rest of us, and
I'll
they
use the
have,
word irrational.
yes, there you go. They may have sort of some negative responses, uh, but ultimately, I find that it always works out, even with some of our more challenging clients. Sometimes it's just picking up a phone and just having an honest conversation, and we end up on the other side of it. And I mean, one of my favorite leaders right now, she sometimes pulls me aside and says, "Tom, it's just Salesforce." And I was like, "Yeah, you know what? It is. It's just Salesforce.
No
This
one's
is."
life is necessarily on the line.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we do this for that, right? We do this for a living, and for some of us a vocation. I think we're all very passionate about it, but at the same time, it's not going to be, no one's going to say, well, maybe for you because you sort of elevated this to this art form. No one on their tombstone is going to say like David Giller's Salesforce genius.
I sure hope the word Salesforce is not on my tombstone. Like, you could say all kinds of other things about me.
Loving father, dedicated admin.
Right.
Or how about like wonderful son, never used a multi-select pick list.
Right. Maybe like as a footnote on the back or something like that. But no, but to your point about managing expectations and communicating. So this, for me, this sort of goes back to what I sort of hinted at earlier when I first approached everything about being a Salesforce admin and being a Salesforce consultant. It came from this very rigorous framework and procedural approach. And if people are wondering, like, you don't seem that uptight, uptight or anything to like have this military kind of style of doing things, I'll just explain that the way I learned how to do not only project management but IT project management, I was I was in GE, and it was through the Six Sigma training, Six Sigma certification. For those of you who are not familiar with Six Sigma, don't worry about it. Basically, all I'm going to say is, according to Six Sigma, if you want to change a doorknob on a door, you need to do all sorts of analysis and gather information from all sorts of users on how they're using the door and what other doorknobs you might have explored, and to make sure it's actually the doorknob and not the hinges on the door that's actually causing or the weight of the door that's causing the problem. So an exponential amount of analysis and documentation, and it could be perceived as red tape or overinflating a particular problem. And before you actually take a screwdriver to even go to the existing doorknob to do anything. So like, my point is that that's where I'm coming from. And why am I bringing that up now? Because within Six Sigma, when it comes to managing projects and identifying and documenting the risks, as well as what are the ways, what are the potential risks associated to a particular project, who is responsible for keeping an eye on that risk, what are the mitigating factors that we are going to explore if that risk becomes unmanageable, or we need to, like, it's going to be live. Like, it's not only a risk, like that's a real problem. What is our backup option? So based on Six Sigma, you actually have some very real documentation around this, and you're maintaining it. And that's part of the packet of project management documentation. So my approach today is basically that watered down dramatically, of simply bullet points or conversation points where you're calling out, having to the point that you made before, Tom, it's about the transparency and the collaboration and the communication, not only internally with the other team members, but also with with really anyone who's involved in the project of, okay, here's what we're doing and here's the road that we're going down. However, here are some of the concerns that we have. Hey, by the way, if you don't actually sign the contract with DocuSign, there's no way that the DocuSign element will be part of this project on day one. If you don't clean up your data, there's no way. We can set up the Conga Composer merge, but your data is going to look like crap. Your forms are going to look like crap, and you're not going to have it. So did you clean up the data? Like, we're doing our part over here. So whatever those risks might be, they need to be called out.
That's a fantastic example. And I think, just to bow tie this as we transition, saying things like what we'll do is, you're responsible for data cleansing. Like, we're certainly to help with the data loading or structuring the data for loading, but you are responsible for data cleansing. Do you have the resources? Is this enough time? This is when we expect the first round of sample data to be ready for us. And that's the sort of expectation setting you should be doing at the beginning of a project. And I think just a good way to frame it up, if you want to see a good example on Trailhead, is you can look there's a trail called How to Engage with Your Salesforce Admin, and it's focused at business users. And the goal of that particular trailhead is to give business users the framework for how to make suggestions or report bugs, and the correct format to provide that information in to better enable your admin to be successful at their job. And so that's a great example of Salesforce setting expectations. I think you have to approach any engagement, from an internal admin to a Salesforce practice lead. I think you have to basically provide the framework and the guidelines and the bullet points, as you mentioned, for how to engage and what we're about to do, just to limit that volatility and the uncertainty and the ambiguity. Thank you for finding that.
No problem. Ready to switch over into the next
I am
segment?
ready to switch over. Let's do it.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we're looking at your screen now.
Sweet. So if anyone was at Dreamforce a couple weeks ago in New York, this will be one a little bit of a refresh, but then also we're gonna go a little deeper onto the topic because I don't have to hold a mic in one hand while trying to do Salesforce configuration in the other one. So um, everything that we do with Process Builder and with Flow and even with Apex, and actually everything that we do inside of software design implementation is grounded in design patterns. And so this sounds like a really sort of high-minded concept, but we're going to bring it down into what we do here and how we function as admins and designers and architects and consultants. So software design pattern basically is just reusable ways to solve a problem. It's not finished code or a finished solution. It's just sort of how we go about something. Something spills on the floor. You have a mental design pattern, a mental framework for how you go about solving that spill. And so it's the same thing when it comes to the work that we do inside of Salesforce. Now, I'd like to elevate the work that we do for a couple reasons. One, we should have the pride of our profession. We are creating software, right? We are creating business process and designing these solutions for clients. And so using traditional software design standards and words does a couple things. It elevates the level of our profession. We are bringing the work we do into sort of the same world as traditional software design. It also allows us to engage in a conversation with developers and other people about what we do using common language. And you'll see how we do that in just a little bit. So patterns are really going to be the basis of how we make this transition from Process Builder into the world of Flow. And so, look, Process Builder and Workflow are going away. We can't unring the bell. And what's interesting about those is those are very rigid structures. And what's scary about Flow is that it's completely open. You have a blank canvas. There's nothing that says start here. You have to know what to put on the screen, whereas everything else is sort of guided. Click this, do that. So I think it's as we go to migrate, if we keep certain patterns in mind, it's going to allow us to do this at scale. It's going to allow us to get there faster. And all that knowledge that we have from years of workflow and process builder, we're going to put it to use. And the benefit of doing so is that, again, it's going to make Flow hopefully easier to understand and to approach, but we're also going to elevate it a little bit. And we're going to take a sort of developer-like approach to how we design with Flow. So let's check out some of these patterns. And I think this is something we're all familiar with, right? Process Builder. We have our Navy box, we pick our object, and then we tell it when we're going to start. Create only, create or update. We have a little blue diamond, we put our decision or criteria in there, if this or, is this field equal to that? And then we have our actions. So if our criteria is met, boop, we head over to true, and then we either stop, continue, head on down to chain, etc. Look at this. This is how developers build with Apex. So they put a trigger and they say on this object, when it's a delete, a create, or an update, or one of those three events, then what are we going to do? They decouple. It's a design standard from the software design world. They create things called trigger handlers that hold the business logic completely separate from the trigger. So that trigger handler is the same thing as our blue diamond and process builder. It's the exact same. And then they have Apex classes. The classes are what actually does something. They're the ones that go and do field updates and create records and make all the magic happen. Apex developers build their automation the exact same way that you build your automation in Process Builder. They define the triggering event. They create their blue diamonds that hold their business criteria. And then they have that criteria, when met, cause their actions. So you were, as an admin using Process Builder, you were really using this design pattern the entire time. Here's an example of a design pattern before we get into creating that Process Builder design pattern in Flow. Here's one that is very common in Flow and one that you'll end up using all the time. So in this case, whenever we need to update a group of records, we never do DML actions inside of a loop. So what that means is if you have a red box inside of your loop, that's what I call a flow no. So we don't do it inside of flow no. And so here, what we do instead is we get the records, and then we check if we found something. We hit our loop, and then we assign the values that we want for the item that we're looping to a single record variable. And the next step, we take this single record variable and add it to our collection. And after we're done, we take that entire collection of records and do our action all at one time. So we update them all or create them all. And so this pattern allows us to have flows that work at scale, that work for hundreds of records at a time, as opposed to failing with 10 records, if you have a red box inside of this loop. So this is an example of a design pattern that you will be using inside of flow all the time. And it's just, again, when we get back to what a pattern is, it's a way that we solve common problems. And so this is a good example of one you'll be using. So let's bring that process builder pattern, the same one that our Apex developers use, and let's bring that into flow. So when we're looking at that process builder, look over here. We have a record triggered flow, and now we have a decision element, and then we're calling our actions. So this is how we're going to build, just like we're using process builder. This is how we're going to approach solving problems in flow. And this is going to allow us to use the same pattern we've all been working with, the same skill, the same sort of muscle memory that we all are familiar with from process builder. We're just going to move it over to this side of the screen. And this tells us where we need to start, right? We're going to start by, defining our criteria, and then we're going to call subflows and actions. So here are the rules here. And first, you got to have naming standards. I think Mary Tagler has a brilliant presentation out there on naming standards inside of your Salesforce org. And so this is really just a building off of her brilliance and others' brilliance. For everything that we do in flow, we always start with the object. And then we say one of two things. Is this a trigger or is it a class? And then if it's a trigger, we say, what type of trigger? Is it a create? Is it a delete? Is it a create and update? And then we just say, when does it happen? Is it an after or before? If it's a class, we say account, class, and then what does it do? So we have some sort of reference. The beautiful thing about this, and I'll show you this right over here. Look what this allows us to do inside of flow. Now, process builder, that UI is horrible for finding anything. It is a miserable experience. But now I can create a list view by object, and I can jump around. So this is all my flows. These are my flow triggers. But what if I just want my account ones? So now my naming convention allows me to do this. And you can see account, class, and then my different descriptions here. Here's a really important one. I'm a big fan of the one trigger per object per event. And the reason why, all triggers, workflow, process builder, Apex, doesn't matter. They're non-deterministic. That's just a fancy way of saying Salesforce has no idea which one fires first and finishes first. No control, no idea. Everyone, so you always wonder, why do people harp on the one process builder per object? Or how can people say one trigger per object? It's because if you don't do that, you're basically flipping a coin and hoping it lands on heads every time. If you've ever been in a situation where you're like, oh, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, 9 times out of 10, you have an order of operations issue going on. And so this will help solve that. And then this other side, triggers and handlers only. Our flow triggers will hold our trigger, the start element, and our handlers are decision elements only. We're not going to do the action inside of our trigger. Why? Because if you ever look at what a flow looks like as it grows over time, imagine your process builder that has 10 criteria diamonds. And imagine what that would look like in flow if all the actions were in there. It would be insane. You would not be able to follow it. By keeping this pattern and this structure and only calling subflows and actions, you will be able to follow along and see exactly what's happening. You'll also have a single place to go for all automation that's triggered from one object. You'll go, oh, I know exactly where to look. Um, Salesforce is actually going to make that a little bit easier for you too. There's this new thing called the uh, Flow Trigger Explorer that'll actually show you which before triggers, which after triggers, and which asynchronous paths on your flow triggers happen when a record is created, or when a record is updated, or when a record is deleted. So Salesforce is helping in a big way in sort of understanding those events and what's going on. I did mention in here there is one exception to our rule that's before triggers, and we'll talk about that one in a second. All right, so here's the PB, the process builder flatter and flow, and I promise we'll show you the details here, and we'll build one of these a little bit. And you can see I have my start element. I'm running immediately, and every one of my decisions is pointing to a subflow, or pointing to multiple subflows, or in some cases I'm using the same subflow multiple places called from different criteria. And then this one's my favorite one. This is something we cannot do in Process Builder. And ask yourself how many times you have repeated a decision node only because one criteria item was different and you needed to point to different actions, and how long that made your process. Now you can, inside of a single decision, put in 5 different sets of criteria and call 5 different actions if you want to. So this is going to take that same pattern, remove some of the pain that we've experienced with Process Builder, and allow us to work a little bit faster. So the benefits of all of this really is it's clean, it's repeatable. We can reuse that logic. We can build our classes as subflows and call them from multiple objects if we want to. The nice thing is those naming standards, this gives us a common language that we can share with developers. We're using triggers and handlers and classes, and it elevates, again, us as admins and us as architects and us as designers. It brings what we do into the same level as what we, look at developers as these just, wizards. We're doing the same work they are. We're just using different tools. They write theirs from scratch. We drag and drop. The outcome is the same. We are automating business processes and creating tools for people to be successful at their job. So enough talking about it. Let's do a few things. So here are my classes I mentioned. So I have one. This one is a loop. It updates all the contacts when an account address is changed. This one is very simple. It just sets an account type. This one looks for the highest account number and then increments it by 1. So these classes just do things. You notice there's no criteria in them, no business logic. These are just classes. And when you set these up, you create variables like account ID. And the important thing is you have to set them as input variables. This allows us to pass in the information that we want from our flow trigger. And so this will give us what we need to build our flow trigger. So we'll do a little bit of this. So here we are, starting in Flow Builder. And I picked a record triggered flow. I picked my object. I'm going with created or updated. This is very critical for our design pattern. Just like in Process Builder, we are not setting requirements in our start. We're going to let our criteria nodes, just like we do in Process Builder, be the arbiters of what happens. So, no, record is created or updated just like we would with Process Builder. And then from here, we start adding things. Just like we would in Process Builder. I like to write cheeky things in my flows. It's just my way of saying. So
You're throwing some personality in there. Instead of using emojis, you're using words.
yeah.
It's all good.
So there we go. I set my criteria, and I have my. So I draw this here. I grab my subflow and I just type in account. Here we go. Naming standards. Why are they important? Imagine how many classes and how many flows you're going to have. Look at how many processes you have. Now I just type in the object that I'm looking for and they're all organized. And I can see account class. And I want the increment account number 1. And this is why that input variable becomes important. Because now I just go ahead and set this to my record ID. Set it to my account ID. Here we go. And then I can keep going with this just like we would in Process Builder, minus all of the really painful, like slow responsiveness of the button. Whenever you click add action and you're just waiting for like the 8 seconds for it to actually do something.
You mean I'm not the only one who struggles with that? By the way, the naming convention suggestion, that's so simple and so freaking mind-blowing. It's so impactful.
Yeah, it's really caught on with our team. We've in October we just said hard stop. We no longer work in Process Builder. We will support existing ones. We're not creating any other ones. And you can imagine what do we do? And it's okay. We have a plan. And so we've been iterating on this plan. We have a how we flow at Crow monthly lunch and learn. Nice. And we spent an hour talking about in this flow only world, what have we experienced? Like we just learned that we can't use pause elements when called from a record trigger flow. Oh boy, that really has some design implications that we had to work through and are figuring out. All right, so our address was changed. Wonderful. Now I need to update all my contacts. So I go to my account and we're going to say update contacts. Same thing, put in my record ID.
And to the subtle point that you're making now without necessarily calling it out, this is also a phenomenal scenario by not only having the class defined as a separate class, those actions are embedded within the class, by also using the transparent naming convention. If there are other scenarios where we want to tap into that particular class, it becomes so easy, A, to find it, and B, to extract that, because you're really not extracting it out. You're just referencing it because it's already its own separate component.
Yes.
You're already referencing it through some other automation. So, for example, you might have some automation where maybe it's initiating through a case getting created where the customer's saying, can you please update my address on file? And it's maybe through the case where it's going to warrant updating the address for maybe it's plural, accounts and contacts, or something happens on the opportunity that warrants doing this.
You said I wasn't going to show this, but this is a great example. This is a multi-object sharing flow. Okay, so this one has multiple objects that it can support, and so we can call this from any flow trigger that we want. And so all my decision does, my element that I'm passing in, is I'm saying, what is your record ID and what is your object name? And so here I say, what is your object name? And then I send it down the correct path: accounts, opportunities,
wow,
a custom object, and all it needs is a record ID to run. And this is what this particular flow does is it creates manual sharing records from a lookup field. This is actually, Jen Lee might kill me. This is actually going to be featured in a webinar. I'm going to take this down. This is coming up in a webinar with Salesforce soon. But
I was thinking this should be an App Exchange listing.
But this is the thing, and it allows, again, scalability, flexibility, reusing the same pattern. All I did from here to create it for opportunities and my custom object was just, I went like this and I said, boop, 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 and then just dragged it down off the screen over here and just updated everything to say contact instead of account.
Unbelievable.
Right. So
don't reveal all the secrents. I don't want Jen coming after me.
I know. Yeah,
Jen, I apologize on Tom's behalf.
This was totally unexpected. It wasn't his fault. And the other thing that you can do to finish our Process Builder design pattern, remember that stop and start and how painful it is, again, waiting for 8 seconds? Right now, this is a stop. Now it's a continue. And now it's a stop, and now it's a continue again. Um, and that's sort of how easy it is. So really, this approach is scalable, it's manageable, it makes our jobs easier in terms of giving us more flexibility, but we use all of the same skills and all of the same approaches that we do with Process Builder. All of that knowledge and all of the years of experience in working with it are 1,000% applicable. We're just translating those into a new screen where we can draw the picture the way that we want in a simpler way. So that's why I've been calling this "You Can Process Build with Flow," because that's exactly what we're doing. We are building process automation. We're just doing it with Flow, but we're using all the same design standards, all the same design rules that we've always had.
I love this. Tom, thank you.
You're
Wait,
welcome.
was there more? I didn't mean to.
No, no, that's. I mean, look, I can talk about this. I can go on because I mean, I love this topic. I'm so excited to just to continue to be sharing it because it's not often in the Salesforce world that we get to be on sort of the bleeding edge of a novel concept, and with flow triggers just really being fully available in this latest release, this is all new ground, right? None of us have had the ability to define this and how it works in small business or enterprise applications. So we're all doing this together, and this is like for me, it's I'm so passionate about it because we get to come up with the rules and shape how we act as a profession moving forward.
100%. And also, to the point that you made earlier, many Salesforce admins are finding themselves in a position right now, realizing, like, oh my gosh, I was comfortable with workflow rules, or at least those admins who have been around long enough in the Salesforce ecosystem where it was before Process Builder even existed, and workflow rules was what we knew, and how we introduced automation and felt like magicians. So okay, workflow rules are basically coming to an end at some point in the future. Process Builder is pretty much coming to an end at some point in the future. And oh my gosh, I have to learn this intimidating, scary thing called flow that I know is way more powerful than workflow rules and Process Builder. But it's also, again, to the point that you made before, a little bit of like a blank canvas, and it can feel super intimidating and overwhelming. And I think part of the beautiful thing is that there are so many enhancements that not only have recently come out, that are continuing to come out with regard to flow to make it way better. There are also a tremendous amount of resources available to learn flow. Like, people are asking me that all the time, and I'm about to ask you, Tom, what your suggestions are for those who are learning or want to embark on the journey of learning flow. What are your recommendations on how people can start learning?
Yeah, so I'll be just 100% transparent. I was scared of flow, and I didn't start using flow even in the most nominal sense until like January 2020. And I had coming back from Dreamforce in 2019, I had the wonderful experience of sitting at a table with John Kucera, the product owner um, for Flow and Process Builder at Salesforce. And so, and I was doing a circles of success on Process Builder with the person who's in charge of Process Builder at Salesforce, just popping in, didn't know he was going to be there. And so as I'm talking about it and going through, he let this gem drop at the table and he goes, yeah, my vision is that Process Builder doesn't exist in the future. And we're all like,
How
yes.
dare you?
Yeah. And that was a year, I mean, Dreamforce was late in 2019. I want to say it was like right
Yeah,
before
yeah,
Thanksgiving.
yeah.
So in like January 2020, I was like, oh, this is gonna happen, and so I was one of those people who was scared as well. And so where I began was where I think everyone should begin, and that is Google. And Jen Lee and Rakesh Gupta are just saints and amazing people who give tirelessly and contribute so much knowledge, and their blogs have so much step-by-step instruction on how to solve common problems in flow. And I would say if you're looking for community resources, I mean, obviously Trailhead, yes, and Salesforce puts out great content. But for those individual business problems that you're trying to solve and you're not sure where to begin, start with Jen Lee's blog, start with Rakesh Gupta's Automation Champion blog. Um, and even I think Force Panda, Narendra Singh, a newer sort of voice and author. A lot of the content that he puts out there is brilliant as well. And then probably my favorite part of using Flow is unofficial Salesforce. Unofficial Salesforce are actual Salesforce employees who, before a feature is released in the Salesforce world, puts out these like tools and resources that allow us to extend Flow via Apex, and it is magical. And so those would be my starting points, those two blogs and Trailhead. And then when you're ready to sort of throw a turbocharger on Flow, check out Unofficial Salesforce as well.
Beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you. I am, while you're speaking, I'm trying to get some of the links of the things that you're mentioning on the screen. Let's officially switch over into QA mode. So let's take care of that right now. All right. So I have a question over here. I actually have two questions that
Sure.
folks submitted earlier. So let me throw them on the screen myself. And oh, it's giving me a.
That's right. Well, I see Samantha's question, so I'll tackle that
Yeah,
one
go
first.
ahead.
Um, you know, Samantha asked, "Are there any resources to continue learning the scalable, efficient use of Flow?" And I think the answer to that, and it's the same answer that unfortunately had to give in New York, and when Rakesh was talking about this at Dreamforce in San Francisco, is and then during Automation Hour in November. Not yet, because again, this is novel territory. This is so new, and we are working on all this together that we are just getting these concepts put together for our teams and testing them. And honestly, Sunday night, 11 o'clock, I was working on this because I realized that we could not use a pause element in a record triggered flow. And I had always used pause elements to do I call it the geolocation wiggle, which is another question for another time, called from Process Builder. And I couldn't do it anymore. And all of a sudden I was like, oh boy. Um, so there's some situations that we don't have all the answers for. And so we're kind of learning along the way. My goal, though, is that over the next month or two, we will have encountered a lot of the gotchas and learned a lot of different things. Our team here at Crow, and by the way, we're hiring at Crow if you're interested, if you're a consultant, a BA, associate consultant, uh, architect, PM.
And how should folks reach out to you if they're interested in following up with you on the job openings? LinkedIn? Email?
LinkedIn is fantastic. I'm always on LinkedIn. Ohana Slack, always happy to talk in there too. Good place to grab me. Um, but to that point, our team is we're building our internal flow knowledge. What the whole idea is that we want to give it away. Like we want to share this resource out, and it will take on a blog format and maybe a series of blog format, and probably to some degree a recorded webinar format too throughout Q1 as we make sure that things we're saying can truly be 100% scalable. So we don't want to put out nothing that leads you in a bad direction. So we're being the guinea pigs so that you don't have to. Um, okay, so I see the next question.
So here, so this one I had to break up into two. Someone submitted this to me earlier. So the first part is, how do you handle situations where you're working on a Salesforce project for a new client and encounter lots of surprises in terms of current configuration that totally throws the project timeline off the rails?
This never happens. What are you talking about? It happens.
I certainly have some thoughts on this also, but I definitely want to hear your thoughts first.
This is the nature of what we do. And this begins at the start of a project. when you say, we're going to go through a very thorough discovery, and out of that, we're going to present you a solution design document, and you're going to sign off on it to solution design and say, yes, this is what we want you to build. And then right after our sprint one, and we do our sprint one demo, and you're doing sprint one UAT, you're going to say, but wait, I forgot. There's also this. And that's going to be okay too, because we have a way to handle that. It's UAT, and if it's substantial and adds new scope, or it's going to alter the timeline, we're going to tell you that. And we're going to do a $0 change order that says, hey, this new requirement was identified. And just so we're all on the same page of why this is happening, this is going to add a week to the project because we need to sort of reconfigure. Okay, great. Or, hey, this is going to add 2 weeks and probably like 40 hours of development time. And that's okay too, because at the beginning of our projects, we said this might happen. And at the beginning of our projects, we explained the change order process. And when we were presented it, we didn't react with, oh my God, what is this? You didn't tell us this. We said, oh, okay, we know this is critical. It's important that we got this now. It's why we do UAT after every sprint. It's why we're constantly showing this to you. It's why we work in a hybrid agile environment. And it's okay. We have a plan for this. You already know the plan. So let's just do that.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, to the example that you just raised, sometimes this comes up as unexpected business requirements where the client is essentially saying, oh, and we forgot about, or we thought we told you about. Yeah, it's not documented anywhere. Anyway, but essentially a brand new requirement that requires a change of some kind, changing the way we were going down the road with this project. So one is a business requirement. The other one is the surprise on the configuration, because even with the most thorough analysis, there could always be one additional element. Sometimes it's an external API that's shoving information into Salesforce. Like we're not going to find it by exploring the existing Salesforce configuration, but there's some surprise of some kind that we uncover with the existing configuration. By the way, this happens anytime there's A, more than one admin, B, you're a relatively new admin or new Salesforce consultant working on a Salesforce implementation, a Salesforce configuration where you were not involved in every single element that was put in. Think of it in terms of your own home. When someone says, hey, whose shoes are those? How did they get here? There are multiple people, unless you are the only one.
Remodeling. Think about, when have you ever had a home remodeling project where they didn't uncover something that it went perfect? And they're like, oh, yeah, this was all up to code when it was done 30 years ago. No worries at all,
And by the way, I very often will tell my clients that I will actually use that analogy in a much more simplified way. And I say, it's sort of like if you get an inexpensive, or forget inexpensive, you get a sink from Home Depot. You want to replace a particular sink in your bathroom. You turn to the plumber and you ask the plumber, how much will it cost? What is the level of effort for replacing the sink? The plumber says, it usually takes me about an hour or two. It's really not a big deal. It will cost X number of dollars. Really, it should not be a big deal. This is not even considered a project. It's more of a task. It's that simple. And then you go ahead, the plumber goes ahead and starts to remove the existing sink, and they look and they see behind the wall. It's like, whoa. Who put together this arts and craft project? Was it your toddler? Like, who did this? Oh, it was my cousin Bob. And everything is unconventional, where all of a sudden the plumber turns to you and says, listen, we got to rip all this off. Like, not that it's just not to my liking or not up to code.
Yeah, right.
It's unsafe, or the problem that you have actually is not with the sink that you're asking me to disconnect. It's with the plumbing behind. But if it was done properly, you would not even have this issue to even need replacing the sink. This is a much bigger project, not because I'm looking to cash in here and make more dollars from you. It's because it was never done properly in the first place. So similarly, and most people can relate to something like that. Similarly with Salesforce, even with the first level of analysis that you're doing ahead of time, you can't possibly uncover every nitty-gritty detail to know like what surprises lurk behind the scenes. So to the point that you made before, Tom, in the first segment of managing expectations, this is where, at least for me, anytime I do encounter these kinds of surprises, I try to be very transparent about it in the exact same way of, look at this gift that someone left for us. And here's how this will impact our project.
And I think that comes back to stating and living by the golden rule of development, that we were all doing the best we could. We put our best effort forward
Right.
with the best information that we had at the moment. And as long as we all sort of understand that, both from the client side and from our team and our side, or our internal admin team, or individually, that we use that as our guiding principle, then a lot of this stuff becomes not contentious, but just sort of, hey, it's there.
Right.
Let's focus on the solutions.
Factually, it's there. We're not criticizing who built it. I'm happy to make fun of them or teach them to do it the right way. But this is not about poking fun. By the way, very often, I find myself in a situation where it's someone with a title that starts with the letter C, as in CIO or CTO or CMO, the head of marketing, who thought they were Salesforce admin. Yes, because they found YouTube, they found Trailhead, so they thought they can do it. And a lot of times when I'm calling this out, they're like, yeah, it was me. I mean, that's not right. I mean, that's what I had at my last job. Dude, that's why you lost that last job. Anyway, okay, is there anything else that we are at the top of the hour? We need to wrap it up. Anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I feel like we can go another hour if we wanted to. It's probably
totally good. All right. Thank you all for joining today. Tom, thank you for being an amazing guest co-host. Thank you for sharing your words of wisdom on setting expectations for any Salesforce project and helping to demystify some of the intimidation factor that many of us have regarding flow. You're awesome.
Thanks, man. This is a ton of fun. Thanks for doing this.
I'm eager to have you join again sometime.
I look forward to it.
All right. Happy holidays to everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care.